A question that shook me. Have you ever felt tired of learning English? Like no matter how hard you try, the words just stay stuck in your head and never come out of your mouth. I was exactly like that. 4 weeks ago in America, a simple question from a child stopped me in the middle of a sunny afternoon and quietly changed how I saw language, confidence, and my own. Silence. That moment is where this story begins, and maybe it is where your story begins too. I still remember the sound of that question very clearly. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was just honest. We were standing in a small park in a quiet American neighborhood. The weather was strange for me. The sun was bright, but the air was cold. In my country, sunshine usually means warmth. In America, I was learning that climate has its own personality. You can feel cold and bright at the same time, just like you can feel scared and curious at the same time when you try to speak English. A little American boy, maybe 7 years old, was talking to his mom. He talked a lot. He talked fast. He talked with his hands, his face, his whole body. At one point, he looked at me and smiled. Then he asked, very naturally, were you allowed to speak when you were a kid? His mother did not stop him. She did not say, that's rude. She did not say, be quiet. She just waited for my answer. That question hit me harder than the cold wind. Were you allowed to speak? I smiled, but inside, my brain froze. In English class, we call this moment blank mind. Your vocabulary disappears. Your grammar runs away. Your mouth opens, but nothing comes out. You know this feeling, right? Your brain is not stupid. It is just scared. So I answered slowly. With very simple English. Not really, I said. I was taught to listen more than speak. The boy looked surprised. Why? He asked. Why? Such a small word. Such a big question. In that moment, I realized something important. This video is not just about English. It is about voice. About permission. About the invisible rules we grow up with. In many cultures, silence means respect. In America, especially with kids, speaking means confidence. Neither is completely right or wrong. But they shape us in very different ways. Psychologists say that when children are encouraged to speak, their brains build stronger connections between thoughts and language. Speaking out loud helps organize ideas. It reduces fear. It trains the nervous system to stay calm while expressing emotions. In simple words, when you speak, your brain learns that it is safe to exist. I did not grow up with that feeling of safety when speaking. And when I started learning English, that fear came back, stronger. Every mistake felt dangerous. Every sentence felt like a test. My body reacted before my mind. My heart beat faster. My shoulders tightened. This is not laziness. This is biology. Your nervous system thinks speaking English is a threat. Standing in that American park, listening to a child ask honest questions without fear, I felt something break softly inside me. Not in a painful way. In a relieving way. Like when you finally take off tight shoes after a long day. I thought about my English learning journey. Years of listening. Years of reading. Very little speaking. I understood a lot, but I said very little. Just like my childhood. Good listener. Quiet student. Safe silence. And here was a child who had been speaking since he could form words. Not perfect words. Not correct grammar. Just real thoughts. This is why this story matters. Because learning English is not just about words. It is about rewriting old rules in your body. Rules like, don't say the wrong thing. Rules like, better be quiet than be embarrassed. In America, I started to see a different rule. Say it, and we will figure it out together. That simple question, were you allowed to speak, became a mirror. It showed me why English felt heavy for so long. It was not because I was bad at languages. It was because my voice had been trained to hide. If you are watching this and feeling tired, unmotivated, or ready to give up on English, I want you to hear this clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. Your brain is protecting you the only way it knows how. But protection is not the same as growth. In this video series, I will tell you my real story from 4 weeks living in America. About climate. About culture. About family dinners. About love, marriage, and kids who speak up. And through that story, we will practice real English. Slow English. Simple English. Human English. Not English for exams. English for life. And it all starts with one quiet, but powerful question that maybe no one ever asked you before. Were you allowed to speak? First weeks in America. Imagine landing in a place where everything looks familiar from movies, but nothing feels the same when you actually breathe the air. That was me during my first weeks in America. 4 weeks sounds short, but when your brain is translating every sound, every face, every rule, 4 weeks feels like 4 months. Especially when you are trying to live, love, and speak English at the same time. The first thing I noticed was the climate. Not just the temperature, but how quickly it changed. One morning was sunny and cold. The next afternoon was warm. Then suddenly windy. My body was confused. In my home country, seasons move slowly. In America, the weather seemed to have opinions. Psychologists say when your body feels unstable, your brain becomes more alert, sometimes anxious. That anxiety does not stay in your body. It travels straight into your language ability. I remember walking into a grocery store on my second day. Bright lights. Long aisles. So many choices. A simple task like buying milk suddenly required English. Not classroom English. Real English. A cashier smiled and asked, "How are you today?" My brain panicked. I knew this question. I had practiced it for years. But my mouth answered too honestly. "I'm tired," I said, slowly. She laughed kindly. "Yeah, it's one of those days." That small moment taught me something important. In America, English is not perfect. It is flexible. People do not expect you to sound like a textbook. They expect you to be human. But when you come from a culture where mistakes feel dangerous, your brain does not believe that yet. The second shock was the rhythm of life. People walked fast, talked fast, decided fast. Children spoke to adults like equals. Not without respect, but without fear. At bus stops, kids asked questions loudly. Why is the bus late? Why is he angry? No one shushed them. No one said, "Don't ask that." My nervous system was constantly surprised. At night, my brain replayed the day in English. Short sentences. Broken grammar. I judged myself harshly. You know this voice. You should be better. You studied for years. Why are you still slow? Science calls this the inner critic, and it gets louder when you are tired and out of your comfort zone. The problem is, this voice blocks learning. When you feel unsafe, your brain switches from learning mode to survival mode. During the first week, I spoke very little. I listened a lot. I watched mouths. I copied intonation. This is natural. Babies do this. But adults shame themselves for it. They think silence means failure. In reality, silence is often preparation. By the second week, something shifted. Not in my English level, but in my attitude. I realized that America did not punish my mistakes. My body was punishing itself. So I started a small experiment. Every day, I would say one unnecessary sentence in English. Not useful. Not required. Just human. At a cafe, instead of only ordering coffee, I added, "It's colder than I expected here." The barista nodded. "Tell me about it," she said. That was it. No grammar correction. No judgment. Just connection. This is how language grows in real life. Through small, low-risk interactions. Neuroscience shows that when you have a positive emotional response while speaking, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine tells your brain, this is good. Remember this. That is how confidence is built. Not through pressure. Through safety. The third shock was how often people asked for opinions. What do you think? Do you like it? Does this work for you? These questions appeared everywhere. At home. At work. Even children were asked what they thought. At first, I answered quickly, just to end the conversation. It's fine. It's okay. Safe words. But slowly, I noticed something. When I spoke more honestly, even with simple English, people listened. They waited. They did not finish my sentences. This waiting space is rare in many cultures. But it is powerful. It tells your brain, your voice matters. Climate, culture, and language are deeply connected. When you move to a new climate, your body adapts. When you move to a new culture, your identity adapts. Language sits in the middle of that change. It carries fear, hope, love, and memory. By the end of the fourth week, my English was not fluent. But it was alive. It had weather in it. It had emotion. It had pauses and mistakes and meaning. I started to understand that learning English through life stories is not slower. It is deeper. If you are learning English and feeling stuck, ask yourself this gently. Are you trying to be perfect? or are you trying to be present? America taught me, in just a few weeks, that presence speaks louder than perfection. And this was only the beginning. Cold weather, warm voices. Have you ever noticed how weather can change the way you think and speak? Not in a poetic way, but in a very physical, very real way. During my 3rd week in America, I finally understood this connection. The weather was cold. Not shocking cold. Just enough to make your hands hide in your pockets, and your shoulders rise without asking permission. And yet, something strange was happening. While the air felt cold, the voices around me felt warm. In my mind, cold weather meant distance. Fewer words. Less emotion. Back home, when it was cold, people spoke less. They moved faster. They protected themselves. But in America, I saw the opposite. People talked more. Kids talked the most. One morning, I was invited to a family gathering. Nothing formal. Just a simple weekend breakfast. Outside, the sky was gray. The wind was sharp. Inside the house, kids were everywhere. They talked about school, about dreams, about things they did. Not like loudly, freely. One child complained about the eggs being too salty. Another said he did not want to wear his jacket, because it felt stupid. No one told them to stop. I sat there quietly, holding a warm cup of coffee, listening. My English brain was tired, but my human brain was curious. Why did cold weather not create cold conversations here? Why did children sound so confident, even when disagreeing? Social scientists say that in colder climates, societies often develop strong communication habits inside homes. When the outside is uncomfortable, the inside becomes emotional. Space. In many American families, conversation is that emotional heater. Words keep people connected when the weather pushes them apart. That idea stayed with me. I realized that language is not just a tool. It is insulation. It keeps relationships warm. As someone learning English, cold weather made everything harder. My mouth felt stiff. My pronunciation felt slower. Muscles tighten when it is cold, including the ones you use to speak. This is real science. Cold temperatures reduce muscle flexibility, which can subtly affect speech clarity. So if you feel like you speak worse English when it is cold, you are not imagining it. But here is the interesting part. While my body struggled, my ears learned faster. I listened more carefully. I noticed tone, intonation, emotion. Kids spoke with confidence, but also with softness. They were not afraid to sound wrong. They were afraid of not being heard. One little girl asked her father, "Why do adults always pretend they are fine?" The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Her father smiled and said, "That's a good question." He did not answer immediately. He respected the question. That moment hit me deeply. In my childhood, cold weather meant fewer questions, fewer emotions. Silence was safety. But here, even in cold air, questions were welcomed. Especially from kids. From a psychological view, When children are allowed to express thoughts freely, their brains develop stronger emotional regulation. They learn that discomfort does not mean danger. Speaking does not lead to punishment. This creates adults who can speak up calmly, even under pressure. I thought about my English journey again. Every time I felt uncomfortable speaking, my brain told me to stop, to hide, to wait. That reaction was trained long before English entered my life. Cold classrooms, strict teachers, quiet success. America's cold weather was teaching me a warm lesson. Comfort does not come from temperature. It comes from permission. So I started copying what I saw. Not the words, but the courage. When I felt cold, instead of becoming silent, I tried to say one small thing. At a bus stop, I said, "This wind is serious." A man laughed. "Yeah, winter's just saying hello." That sentence was not important. The act was. My brain received a new message. Cold does not equal danger. Speaking does not equal trouble. Language learners often think confidence comes after fluency. Science shows the opposite. Confidence comes from repeated safe experiences. Fluency follows later. Kids in America speak up not because their English is perfect, but because their environment tells them it is safe to try. That safety creates warmth. By the end of that week, I noticed something else. When I spoke, even slowly, people leaned in. They listened. Warm voices filled cold spaces. English stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a blanket. Not perfect. Not fancy. Just enough to keep me connected. If you are learning English in a place or season that feels cold, remember this. Your voice can be the warmest thing in the room. You do not need complex words. You need honest ones. Cold weather teaches you this quietly. When the environment is harsh, connection becomes essential. And connection begins with sound. With breath. With a voice that dares to exist. In America, I learned that warmth is not something you wait for. It is something you speak into being. Kids who speak freely. Have you ever watched a child interrupt an adult and felt your whole body tense up, like something terrible was about to happen? That reaction lives deep in many of us. In my 4th week in America, I watched the opposite happen again and again, and each time it quietly rewired something inside my head. American kids speak freely. Not because they are rude. Not because they are spoiled. But because their environment teaches them that speaking is normal. One afternoon, I sat in a living room while a group of kids worked on a school project. The adults were talking in the kitchen. Suddenly, a boy walked in and said, "I don't think this rule makes sense." He was talking about a school rule. He was calm, clear, confident. An adult asked, "Why?" And then something amazing happened. The boy explained his thinking. Slowly. With mistakes. With pauses. No one laughed. No one corrected his grammar. They corrected ideas, not his right to speak. That moment stayed with me. In many cultures, children learn the sentence, "because I said so" very early. It ends conversations. In America, I noticed a different sentence. Tell me why. That sentence invites language. It invites thinking. It invites courage. From a brain science perspective, this matters more than we think. When kids are encouraged to explain themselves, their prefrontal cortex becomes more active. This is the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, decision-making, and self-control. Speaking trains thinking. Thinking trains confidence. Confidence trains more speaking. It is a loop. I saw this loop everywhere. At dinner tables. In classrooms. At playgrounds. Kids negotiated bedtime. They questioned homework. They disagreed. Respectfully. Not perfectly. But openly. And each time they spoke, their voice became a little stronger. For someone learning English as an adult, this was both inspiring and painful. Inspiring because I could see what confidence looks like. Painful because I could see what I missed. My English fear was not born in English class. It was born in childhood silence. I remembered being told, don't talk back. Don't ask too much. Adults know better. Those sentences trained my body to associate speaking with danger. Years later, English just became a new stage for an old fear. So when I tried to speak English, my body reacted like a child about to be punished. Fast heartbeat. Dry mouth. Blank mind. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. American kids are conditioned differently. Their nervous systems learn early that speaking leads to conversation, not consequences. That difference changes everything. I tested this idea on myself. I started acting like a beginner kid, not a failing adult. When I did not understand something, I said, "Can you say that again?" When I disagreed gently, I said, "I see it differently." Simple English. Honest English. Child-level courage. And something surprising happened. People responded positively. They slowed down. They listened. They adjusted. My brain started collecting evidence. Speaking is safe. Speaking is useful. Speaking connects. Educational research supports this. Children who are encouraged to speak freely develop stronger language skills and emotional intelligence. Adults who recreate this environment for themselves can reduce language anxiety significantly. You cannot change your childhood, but you can change your practice. One evening, I watched a mother ask her daughter, "What do you think we should do this weekend?" The child thought for a moment and answered seriously. Her opinion mattered. That moment was not about planning. It was about identity. You are someone whose voice counts. I realized that learning English is deeply connected to believing your voice counts. Grammar books cannot give you that belief. Only experience can. So here is a practical exercise I learned from watching American kids. Speak before you are ready. Not loudly. Not perfectly. Just honestly. Say one sentence that expresses a thought, not a performance. It could be, "I'm not sure." Or "I need help." Or "I don't agree." These sentences are powerful because they train your nervous system, not just your vocabulary. Kids speak freely because they practice freedom daily. Adults wait for permission. The truth is, no one is coming to give you that permission. You have to borrow it from a 7-year-old. By the end of that week, I noticed my English changing. Not in complexity, but in tone. I sounded more alive. Less careful. More present. Like I was finally in the conversation, not watching it from behind glass. This section of my story matters, because it answers the title question. Why do American kids speak up? Because their world lets them. Because their mistakes are not crimes. Because curiosity is rewarded, not punished. And maybe the real question for us is not, how can I speak better English, but what would happen if I allowed myself to speak at all? Sometimes. The bravest English sentence you can say is not a long one. It is a simple one. I have something to say. My silent childhood. Have you ever noticed that silence can feel heavy, even when nothing bad is happening? Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that sits on your chest and tells you, don't move. Don't speak. Don't be wrong. That was the silence of my childhood, and in my 5th week thinking back in America, I finally understood how deeply it shaped the way I learn English today. When I was a child, being quiet was a compliment. Adults smiled when I didn't interrupt. Teachers praised me for listening. Silence meant I was good. Speaking meant I was risky. Every time I wanted to say something, my brain did a quick calculation. Is this worth trouble? Is this smart enough? Is this safe? Most of the time, the answer was no. So I learned to swallow words. At school, I knew the answers. At home, I had opinions. But they stayed inside. Over time, my brain learned an important lesson. Thoughts are private, not shared. Psychologists call this internalization. When children are not encouraged to speak, their thinking becomes quiet, inward, and cautious. They still think deeply, but they don't practice turning thoughts into sound. Years later, English walked into this old pattern like a guest who didn't know the rules. Suddenly, I was asked to speak, to answer, to express. And my nervous system said, no, thank you. This is why many adult learners understand English well, but cannot speak it. It is not a language problem. It is a voice problem. In America, watching kids speak freely felt like watching an alternate version of life. A version where my childhood self learned a different rule. A rule that said, try first. Fix later. Instead, I grew up with fix everything before you try. That rule sounds smart, but it kills momentum. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When you hesitate too long before speaking, your brain activates the amygdala, the fear center. Fear blocks access to language areas. That is why your mind goes blank. Silence feels safe, but it trains fear. I remember my first English classes as an adult. The teacher asked simple questions. My heart raced. My palms sweated. My mouth dried. I knew the words, but my body refused to cooperate. I blamed myself. I thought I was lazy, slow, untalented. But in America, reflecting on my silent childhood, I saw the truth. My body was doing exactly what it was trained to do. Stay quiet. Stay safe. One evening, I sat alone thinking about this and tried a small experiment. I spoke English out loud to myself. Not to practice grammar. To practice permission. I said simple sentences about my day. I felt cold today. I was nervous. I liked the coffee. No one corrected me. No one judged me. My body slowly relaxed. This is not silly. This is science. Speaking out loud, even alone, trains your brain to connect thought and sound without fear. It rebuilds what childhood silence interrupted. I realized something else. My silent childhood also made me a good listener. I noticed details. Emotions. Tone. That is not a weakness. It is a strength. The goal is not to erase silence, but to balance it with voice. American kids are loud because they are allowed. Silent kids become thoughtful adults, but only if they reclaim their voice later. English became my chance to do that. If you are learning English and feel stuck, ask yourself gently, when did you first learn to be quiet? That memory matters more than any textbook. Healing that memory changes everything. Your childhood trained you to survive. Now, you are allowed to train yourself to live. And living makes noise. Family dinner conversations. Have you ever noticed how much language hides inside a meal? Not inside the food, but inside the pauses, the small comments, the jokes that don't matter and yet somehow matter the most. In my time in America, family dinners became the place where I learned more real English than in any class, book, or app one had ever used. Not because people tried to teach me, but because conversation was treated like food itself, something everyone deserves a share of. The first dinner surprised me. There was no formal start. No clear signal that the meal was important. People walked in and out of the kitchen. Someone laughed. Someone complained about being hungry. Kids talked while adults talked. Voices overlapped. My instinct told me this was chaos. In my culture, meals are quiet or controlled. Children eat, listen and wait. Here, dinner was alive. At one point, a child interrupted an adult story and said, "That's not how it happened." The room paused. My body tensed automatically. I waited for correction. Instead, the adult smiled and said, "Oh yeah. Tell it your way." And the child did. Slowly. With missing words. With confidence. That moment taught me something powerful. In this family, dinner was not about perfect stories. It was about shared voices. From a learning perspective, this matters deeply. Linguists say that language is best acquired in low-pressure, emotionally safe environments. Family dinners create exactly that. No grades. No tests. No spotlight. Just participation. Your brain stays relaxed, which keeps the language centers open. This is why children learn language fastest at home, not in classrooms. As an English learner, I felt two emotions at the table. Fear and opportunity. Fear because I was not used to jumping into conversations. Opportunity, because no one expected me to be impressive. They expected me to be present. At first, I stayed quiet. I listened. I smiled. I nodded. This is familiar territory. But something was different. People noticed my silence, not as a problem, but as curiosity. Someone asked, "What do you think?" Not loudly. Not urgently. Just an open door. My heart beat faster. That old childhood feeling returned. Say something safe. Say something small. So I did. In my country, dinner is quieter, I said. Simple sentence. Simple grammar. The reaction surprised me. People leaned in. They asked questions. Why? Do kids talk less? Do families eat together often? My simple sentence turned into a bridge. Not because it was advanced English, but because it was real. That night, I realized something important. You don't need a lot of English to join a conversation. You need timing, honesty, and courage. Family dinners taught me that conversation is not about taking space. It is about sharing space. Kids at the table practiced this naturally. They disagreed. They changed their minds. They expressed feelings like, "I don't like this," or "that hurt my feelings." These sentences are emotionally complex, but linguistically simple. They train emotional intelligence and language at the same time. Psychologists explain that when children regularly participate in family conversations, they develop stronger verbal skills and higher self-esteem. Their brains associate speaking with belonging. As adults, they carry that confidence into public spaces. Watching this, I felt a quiet sadness. I realized I had rarely spoken freely at the table growing up. Meals were functional, respectful, silent. I learned discipline, but I missed practice. English became my second chance at the dinner table. So I started setting small goals. Not to speak a lot. Just to speak once per meal. One sentence. One thought. Sometimes it was about the food. This soup is comforting. Sometimes it was about weather. The cold makes me tired. These sentences were not impressive. But they were alive. My brain began to relax. Repetition created safety. Safety created flow. There is a scientific reason for this. Repeated low-stress speaking experiences reduce cortisol, the stress hormone. When cortisol drops, memory improves. Vocabulary sticks. Pronunciation smooths out. Learning becomes easier without effort. I also noticed something else. When kids spoke, adults listened fully. No phones. No rushing. That attention sends a strong message to the brain. Your words are worth time. Imagine how different English learning would feel if you believed that. If you are learning English at home, you can recreate this environment. You don't need a family. You need ritual. Eat while listening to English stories. Pause and comment out loud. Talk to yourself about taste, memory, emotion. Make language part of life, not a separate task. Family dinners in America showed me that English is not built through memorization. It is built through moments. Moments where you feel included. Moments where silence is a choice, not a rule. By the end of those dinners, I didn't feel fluent. But I felt human in English. And that feeling is the foundation of everything else. Language grows where connection lives. And sometimes, connection starts with passing the salt and saying, "This reminds me of home." Love across cultures. Have you ever tried to explain your feelings in a language that still feels foreign, and suddenly realized that love is much harder to translate than words? That was my reality in America. During those weeks, love was no longer just an emotion. It became a daily language practice, a cultural lesson, and sometimes a quiet battlefield between what I felt and what I could say. In my culture, love is often shown through actions. You do things. You endure. You stay silent. Saying, "I love you," is rare and sometimes uncomfortable. In America, I noticed the opposite. Love is spoken. Feelings are named. Emotions are placed on the table like food at dinner. If something feels wrong, people talk about it. Not always gently. Not always perfectly. But openly. This difference shocked me more than the weather. I remember a simple moment. A small disagreement at home. Nothing dramatic. Just a misunderstanding about time and plans. In my old habit, I went quiet. I waited. I assumed silence would make things calm again. Instead, the silence made things heavier. The other person looked confused. "Can you tell me what you're feeling?" they asked. That sentence felt like pressure. Not because I didn't know what I felt, but because I had never practiced saying it. In English or in my first language. My brain searched for advanced words. I thought love conversations required perfect language. But my mouth finally said something very simple. "I feel left out," I said. Short sentence. Honest. My voice shook. Something surprising happened. The tension softened. The problem did not disappear, but connection returned. That was my first real lesson. In American relationships, clarity is often more important than elegance. Psychologists explain this through emotional labeling. When you name an emotion, even in simple language, your brain reduces emotional intensity. It turns chaos into something manageable. Speaking feelings is not weakness. It is regulation. For English learners, this is powerful. You don't need poetic English to communicate love. You need truthful English. I began to observe American couples more closely. They talked about feelings often. Even uncomfortable ones. Especially uncomfortable ones. They said things like, "That hurt me, I need space. I don't feel heard." These sentences are grammatically simple, but emotionally brave. Kids learn this early. They hear adults talk about emotions. They copy. By the time they grow up, speaking about feelings feels normal. This creates adults who speak up not just in love, but in life. In contrast, many of us learn that love means patience, not words. That endurance equals loyalty. That silence equals maturity. Those beliefs are not wrong, but they create challenges when combined with a language that expects expression. English forced me to confront this gap. I could no longer hide behind silence. Silence in English sounded like distance, coldness, even rejection. I had to choose, stay comfortable or stay connected. So I started small. I practiced emotional English like vocabulary. Not in lists, but in moments. I appreciate this. I feel nervous. I'm trying my best. Each sentence felt risky, but also freeing. Neuroscience shows that repeated emotional expression builds new neural pathways. Over time, your brain learns that vulnerability does not lead to danger. It leads to understanding. This reduces anxiety not just in relationships, but in language use overall. Love became my best English teacher. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. When something matters deeply, motivation changes. You stop trying to sound smart. You try to be clear. One night, after a long day, I said something I had never said before, in any language. I don't want to lose this. The sentence was imperfect. My pronunciation was slow. But it was real. And it was heard. That moment shifted something inside me. English was no longer a skill I practiced. It was a bridge I used. Cultural differences still created misunderstandings. Sometimes my directness felt awkward. Sometimes my silence felt confusing. But each conversation taught me something new. Love across cultures is not about choosing one style over another. It is about learning when to speak and when to listen. If you are learning English and feel blocked emotionally, look at your relationships. Are there feelings you have never said out loud? English might feel hard because it is asking you to grow, not just linguistically, but personally. Love pushes language forward. It demands presence. It demands courage. By the end of those weeks, my English was still simple. But my voice was stronger. I had learned that speaking up does not destroy harmony. Sometimes it creates it. Love, I realized, is not silent in English. And maybe it doesn't have to be silent in your life either. Simple English, real life. Have you ever felt embarrassed because your English sounds too simple, like a child's version of what you want to say? I used to feel that shame every day. I believed that if my English was not complex, it was not valuable. Living in America slowly destroyed that belief. Real life does not reward complex English. It rewards useful English. During my daily routine, I noticed something important. People around me did not speak in long sentences. They spoke in short bursts. Half sentences. Emotional sounds. English in real life is broken, flexible, and full of pauses. The fluency comes from flow, not perfection. One morning, I missed the bus. I felt frustrated. When someone asked what happened, I did not search for advanced words. I said, I'm annoyed. I was late. 2 simple sentences. The listener understood everything. No grammar lesson required. This is when I realized that simple English is not beginner English. It is survival English. From a brain perspective, simple language reduces cognitive load. When you use simple structures, your brain has more space to focus on meaning, tone, and connection. This is why children can communicate deeply with very basic grammar. They are not distracted by form. For adult learners, complexity feels safe. It gives the illusion of control. But complexity often blocks speed. Simple English moves fast. It lives. I started intentionally limiting myself. Not because I lacked vocabulary, but because I wanted confidence. I used present tense, short clauses, clear verbs. I need help. I don't understand. That makes sense. These sentences appeared everywhere in my day. Each time I used them, my body relaxed a little more. Repetition trained my nervous system. Speaking no longer felt like stepping onto a stage. It felt like walking. I noticed another thing. When I used simple English, people responded with simple English. Conversations slowed down naturally. This created a learning loop. I could listen, understand, respond. Not perfectly, but fully. Linguists call this comprehensible input and output. You learn best when language is slightly above your level, not far beyond it. Simple English keeps conversations inside that zone. I practiced this everywhere. At stores. At home. In emotional moments. When I felt tired, I said, I'm exhausted. When I felt grateful, I said, this means a lot to me. These phrases are emotionally rich, but linguistically simple. Simple English also helped me heal old fear. Each successful interaction told my brain, you can do this. Confidence grew quietly. Not through applause, but through consistency. I stopped apologizing for my English. Instead of saying, sorry, my English is bad, I said, let me say it another way. That small change shifted power back to me. Research in psychology shows that self-compassion improves learning outcomes. When you treat mistakes as data, not failure, progress accelerates. Simple English encourages that mindset. One night, I realized something beautiful. English was no longer the main focus of my attention. Life was. English became the tool, not the goal. That is when fluency begins. If you are learning English, give yourself permission to be simple. Complexity will come later. Clarity comes first. Simple English is not a limitation. It is a foundation. And foundations hold everything. Why speaking builds confidence. Have you ever wondered why some people speak with confidence even when their English is not perfect, while others stay silent even though they understand almost everything? I asked myself that question many times during my weeks in America. And slowly, through observation, experience, and a little science, the answer became clear. Confidence does not come from speaking well. Confidence comes from speaking often. At first, this idea felt uncomfortable. I believed confidence was a reward. Something you earn after years of practice, correct grammar, and a big vocabulary. But American kids showed me a different truth. They speak first. Confidence follows later. Science supports this more than we realize. When you speak, even imperfectly, your brain receives feedback from the environment. If nothing bad happens, your nervous system relaxes. The next time you speak, fear is slightly lower. This process is called exposure learning. It is the same principle used in therapy to reduce anxiety. Silence, on the other hand, teaches the brain that avoidance works. You don't speak, nothing goes wrong. So your brain thinks, good choice. Stay quiet next time too. Over time, fear grows stronger, not weaker. This is why confidence never arrives if you keep waiting for it. I saw this clearly with children in America. They spoke without permission. They made mistakes out loud. Adults corrected ideas, not identity. A child could say something wrong and still feel safe. That safety is the birthplace of confidence. I compared this with my own experience. When I stayed silent, my English did not improve. My listening improved, yes. My reading improved. But my speaking stayed frozen. Confidence stayed far away, like a prize behind glass. So I tried a different approach. I decided to speak before I felt ready. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. One sentence here. One opinion there. One honest reaction. At first, my body resisted. My heart beat faster. My voice felt weak. This is normal. Your nervous system does not change habits quietly. But something interesting happened after a few days. The fear curve flattened. Speaking still felt uncomfortable, but less shocking. Neuroscientists explain this through habituation. When your brain experiences the same stimulus repeatedly without negative consequences, the emotional response decreases. Speaking English stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a routine. I also noticed how speaking affected my thinking. When I spoke, my thoughts became clearer. Problems felt smaller. Emotions felt lighter. This is because language organizes experience. When you put feelings into words, your brain moves from emotional chaos to cognitive structure. American culture encourages this early. Kids are asked, "What do you think? How do you feel?" These questions train them to connect inner experience with language. That connection builds self-trust. If I can say what I feel, I can handle it. This applies directly to English learning. When you speak, you are not just practicing language. You are practicing self-trust in a new environment. One day, I made a small mistake in conversation. I used the wrong word. I noticed immediately. My old habit would have been to stop speaking, to apologize repeatedly. This time, I corrected myself and continued. No one reacted negatively. The conversation moved on. That moment was important. It taught my brain that mistakes are not emergencies. They are speed bumps. Psychological studies show that people who treat mistakes as normal data points learn faster and retain information longer. Confidence grows when failure is safe. I began to understand why American kids speak up. It is not because they are naturally brave. It is because their environment teaches them that speaking is not dangerous. Confidence is learned behavior. You can learn it too. Here is a practical method I used. I set a daily speaking target. Not time-based. Not complexity-based. Just frequency. I aim to speak English aloud at least 10 times a day. A comment. A question. A reaction. Even a sentence to myself. This removed pressure. 10 small moments felt achievable. And each moment added evidence to my brain. Speaking is okay. Another key factor is feedback. Confidence grows faster when feedback is neutral or positive. In America, people often respond to meaning, not form. They care about what you say, not how perfect it sounds. That focus on meaning protects confidence. If you live in a place where people correct you harshly, create your own safe environment. Speak to yourself. Record your voice. Join supportive communities. Confidence is not location dependent. It is experience dependent. I also learned that confidence is contextual. You might feel confident ordering food, but not expressing emotions. That's normal. Confidence grows in layers. Each layer needs its own practice. By the end of those weeks, I noticed a shift. I still made mistakes. I still spoke slowly. But my body no longer panicked. English felt like something I could use, not something that judged me. Confidence did not arrive one day like a gift. It grew quietly, sentence by sentence. So if you are waiting to feel confident before you speak, try reversing the order. Speak first. Confidence will follow. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But reliably. Because confidence is not the cause of speaking. It is the result. Small practice, big change. Have you ever promised yourself that you would seriously practice English from tomorrow, only to feel exhausted before you even begin? I lived in that cycle for years. Big plans. Strong motivation. Zero energy. It wasn't until my time in America that I finally understood something simple, but life-changing. Progress does not come from big effort. It comes from small practice done consistently. In the beginning, I believed improvement required long study sessions, complex methods, and perfect schedules. When I couldn't maintain them, I blamed my discipline. But watching daily life in America, especially how children learn, showed me a different path. Kids don't study English. They use it. In tiny moments. All day long. So I changed my strategy. I stopped asking, how can I improve fast, and started asking, what is the smallest action I can repeat today? The first change was how I listened. Instead of long listening practice, I listened for short, real moments. A sentence from a kid. A comment from a cashier. A joke at dinner. I focused on understanding the feeling, not every word. This trained my brain to process meaning, not perfection. The second change was how I spoke. I made speaking unavoidable, but easy. I talked about what I was already doing. I'm tired. This weather is confusing. I need a break. These sentences matched my life, so my brain didn't resist. Psychologists call this habit stacking. You attach a new behavior to an existing one. Speaking English while making coffee. Listening to English while walking. Reading English messages while waiting. No extra time. No extra stress. At first, the change felt too small to matter. But science says small habits are powerful because they reduce resistance. When resistance is low, consistency increases. And consistency beats intensity every time. I also changed how I practiced reading. Instead of long texts, I read short messages, menus, signs, and notes. I read out loud. Slowly. This connected reading and speaking. My pronunciation improved without effort. Another small practice was repetition. Not repeating words, but repeating ideas. I would say the same thought in slightly different ways. I am cold. It's colder than I expected. This weather is freezing. This built flexibility and confidence. Neuroscience explains why this works. Repetition strengthens neural pathways. When pathways are strong, access becomes automatic. English started coming out without forcing. Emotion played a big role too. Small wins felt good. Each successful sentence released dopamine. Dopamine motivated me to try again. Big goals often feel far away. Small wins feel immediate. I noticed that kids in America repeat this process naturally. They try. They fail. They try again. They don't measure progress. They just keep moving. That is why their improvement looks fast. By focusing on small practice, my English improved quietly but deeply. One day, I realized I had spoken English all day without feeling tired. That was new. If you feel stuck, stop chasing big change. Start collecting small moments. One sentence today. One question tomorrow. Over time, these moments become your new normal. Big change is not loud. It is patient. And patience speaks fluently. A turning point at home. Have you ever experienced a moment so small that no one else noticed it, yet it quietly changed the direction of your life? That was my turning point at home. In America. Not in public. Not in a classroom. But in a familiar space where old habits usually return without permission. By this time, I had already learned many things. I understood why American kids speak up. I knew that confidence grows through speaking. I practiced simple English daily. But knowledge alone does not change behavior. Change happens when theory meets emotion. That evening started normally. Dinner was over. The house was calm. The kids were in another room. A small family decision needed to be made. Nothing dramatic. But my opinion mattered. I felt it before anyone said it. That familiar pressure rose in my chest. Speak or stay quiet. My old self would have chosen silence. Silence felt polite. Safe. Responsible. Even wise. Silence had protected me for years. But something inside me resisted this time. I had been practicing for weeks, and my nervous system was slowly learning new rules. Someone asked, "What do you think?" That sentence still scared me. Even now. But instead of answering quickly or avoiding it, I paused. I took a breath. That pause was not hesitation. It was permission. I told myself. Say it simply. I don't think this works, I said. The sentence felt heavy as it left my mouth. My voice was calm, but my body was alert. I waited for tension. For correction. For discomfort. None came. Instead, there was curiosity. Why? Someone asked. Not aggressively. Genuinely. So I continued. Slowly. I feel like we're rushing. And I feel left out when decisions are fast. Simple words. Honest feelings. Not perfect English. But real. That moment was my turning point. Not because I was suddenly fluent. But because I stayed present after speaking. I did not apologize. I did not retreat. I stayed in the conversation. Psychologists call this emotional exposure with response prevention. You face the fear and don't escape. When the feared consequence doesn't happen, your brain updates its beliefs. Speaking is safe. I felt something shift physically. My shoulders relaxed. My breathing slowed. The conversation continued. Solutions appeared. Not because I was right, but because I was included. That night, I realized something profound. Speaking up did not damage harmony. It created it. Silence had protected peace, but it also blocked connection. This moment mattered because it happened at home. Home is where our deepest habits live. If you can change there, you can change anywhere. I thought about American kids again. They practice speaking at home every day. Home is their training ground. By the time they speak in public, it feels normal. I had missed that training. But it was not too late. Language learning often focuses on external situations. Ordering food. Giving presentations. But the hardest place to speak is where your identity feels most exposed. Home. That is why this turning point was so powerful. It rewrote an old rule. Speaking does not make me difficult. It makes me honest. From a neuroscience perspective, this kind of experience strengthens self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that your actions matter. Once that belief grows, motivation follows naturally. After that night, my English felt different. Not faster. Not smarter. Just steadier. My voice felt anchored. If you are learning English, look for your turning point. It may not be dramatic. It may be one sentence spoken at the right moment. Don't wait for confidence. Use courage. Because one honest sentence at home can change the way you speak everywhere else. A happy ending with a voice. Have you ever noticed that happy endings are rarely loud? They don't arrive with fireworks or perfect sentences. Most of the time, they arrive quietly. When you finally stop fighting yourself. My story in America did not end with fluent English or sudden confidence. It ended with something much deeper. I found my voice, and I stopped being afraid of it. By the end of those weeks, life felt calmer. Not easier, but clearer. English was still slow in my mouth, but it no longer felt heavy in my chest. That difference matters more than people think. When fear leaves the body, language has space to grow. At home, conversations changed. Not dramatically. Just naturally. I spoke more. I listened differently. Silence became a choice, not a habit. When I didn't agree, I said so gently. When I felt tired, I said it honestly. When I felt grateful, I spoke it out loud. And something beautiful happened. The family atmosphere softened. Decisions felt shared. Emotions moved instead of getting stuck. This is something American culture understands well. When people speak, pressure doesn't build. It releases. I watched the kids again. They spoke freely, just like before. But now, instead of feeling pain or regret, I felt connection. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the same rhythm. We talked. We laughed. Sometimes we disagreed. And nothing broke. This is the part people rarely tell you about learning English. When your voice grows, your relationships change. When your relationships change, your identity follows. Psychologists say that identity is shaped by repeated behavior. If you repeatedly speak up, your brain slowly updates its self-image. You stop seeing yourself as the quiet 1-inch or the bad speaker. You become someone who communicates. That identity shift is powerful. It affects marriage, parenting, work, even how you talk to yourself. I noticed this especially with children. When I spoke more openly, kids responded with more trust. They asked questions. They shared thoughts. They didn't see me as distant. They saw me as present. Language builds bridges not only across cultures, but across generations. This connects directly to the title of this video. Why do American kids speak up? Because they grow up seeing adults speak honestly. They grow up in homes where voices are not dangerous. They learn early that words are tools, not weapons. And now, I was learning that too. My English journey didn't end. It stabilized. I stopped chasing fluency like a finish line. I focused on use, on life, on meaning. That is when improvement becomes sustainable. There is also science behind this ending. When you feel emotionally safe, your brain enters a state called optimal learning readiness. Memory improves. Attention sharpens. Language acquisition accelerates naturally. This is why happy endings are not just emotional. They are neurological. I want to be clear about something. A happy ending does not mean there are no more mistakes. I still forget words. I still mispronounce sounds. I still pause. But now, those moments do not define me. They are just part of communication. This is what I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't need perfect English to live fully in English. You need a voice that dares to exist. If you are watching this and feeling tired, discouraged, or invisible in your English learning, remember this story. Remember that your silence has a history. It once protected you. But you are allowed to update that system. You are allowed to speak slowly. You are allowed to sound simple. You are allowed to take space. That permission is the real lesson behind American kids who speak up. My story ends with harmony, not because everything became easy, but because communication became possible. Love felt lighter. Family felt closer. English felt human. And maybe that is the happiest ending of all. Not fluency. Not perfection. But a voice that finally feels like home. If you stayed with me until this moment, maybe a quiet question is sitting in your mind right now. If I start speaking, will anyone really listen? In America, children grow up learning one powerful lesson early. Their voice matters. Many of us, however, have to relearn that lesson much later in life, often through a new language. Learning English is not just about vocabulary or grammar. It is about reclaiming your voice. About allowing yourself to speak, to make mistakes, and to exist in another language. If you understand English but feel afraid to speak, know many words but stay silent, have studied English for years but still lack confidence, then this channel was created for you. In the next videos, I will continue sharing real-life stories from the United States. Stories about why American kids speak up so freely. Love, marriage, and family across cultures. Real English from real life, spoken slowly, clearly, and naturally. No pressure. No boring textbooks. Just English through stories, so you can practice listening, reading, and speaking without fear. Subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss the next story. Turn on notifications, so each week you have one more reason not to give up on English. And if this story touched you, leave a comment below. Were you allowed to speak when you were a child? Your answer might seem small, but it could be the beginning of something much bigger. I'll see you in the next video.